Happy Friday, hockey fans. Welcome into an all-new edition of Daily Faceoff Live, streaming live over on the Daily Faceoff YouTube and brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION, whatever the moment is. Never ordinary at Bet365. Tyler Yaremchuk and Frank Saravalli with you. Frank Saravalli coming to us from beautiful Lake Placid. Frank, I'm in the big ballroom at the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge for the annual pond hockey tournament. We're both in great spots heading into the weekend.
Great cold spots and two totally different sides of the continent. So still battling the flu bug, grinding through, and you've got a fun weekend ahead of pond hockey. I've got a minor hockey tournament here. Let's go.
I'm scheduling myself to be out with the flu for Monday because I think this weekend, as it usually does, will take a little bit of a toll on me.
Yeah, I don't know if that's going to be in the cards.
All right, we do have our Dominion Lending Center's poll question up now in the Daily Faceoff YouTube chat, so have your vote over there. It is all about JT Miller. We'll have more on that in a little bit because Frank also has a new trade targets board, which is the topic of our big segment for today. But first, Frank, let's get to the nightcap brought to you by JP Weisers. Proud to be the official whiskey of the NHL, offering Canadian hockey fans a premium drink choice to enhance every game night experience across the country. JP Weisers, the official whiskey of game night. And there were a couple of teams last night, Frank, making statement victories across the NHL. Let's start in Edmonton, where we were expecting some fireworks between the Canucks and the Oilers, and they kind of delivered. It was a pretty chippy affair, a handful of scrums after the whistles. There weren't any fights in that game, but you had Corey Perry doing his best to mix it up. It was really, we haven't seen him be that level of the worm since he got to Edmonton. At least it's been a little bit scarce, but he was in peak vintage Corey Perry form last night. And the Oilers, after all the drama, Connor Garland was getting booed by the Edmonton crowd, everything that was said in the media and the statements, all that. It is the Oilers who end up getting the last laugh. For the second time this season, they pop 6 or more on the Vancouver Canucks, and they end up winning the season series.
Yeah, and in the end, I think it's not necessarily as much of a statement by the Oilers as it was a statement in a negative direction for the Canucks. It feels like night after night, they've continued to be questioned by their head coach, Rick Tocchet, who essentially has now pointed their next game against the Washington Capitals as a must-win. It's late January. It would feel like it's getting early for that, yet that's the spot that Vancouver finds itself in as Edmonton continues to get stronger and stronger. It seems like another statement, too, in Leon Draisaitl's case for the Hart Trophy. And the Oilers are now pretty much neck and neck with the Vegas Golden Knights, having erased a 6-point gap from 10 days ago in the standings. And they're right on their heels challenging for a Pacific Division title. So a lot moving in Edmonton's direction, even without 97 on the ice. And for Vancouver, a lot to figure out.
Yeah, no doubt. You mentioned Leon Draisaitl continuing to make his case for the Hart Trophy. How about this pass he makes on the game's opening goal from his own goal line, spins around off a check from Connor Garland, and floats a one-touch backhand saucer pass across both the blue line and the center line to find Zach Hyman, who, with no more bubble on, goes and finds the back of the net. But Frank, if Draisaitl wins the Hart Trophy this year, that is another one of those goals. It'll be on the montage.
Okay, so shoot me straight, though. When he does spin and he's looking on the backhand sauce to get out of the zone, is he looking for the guy at the near blue line or the far blue line?
Ooh, okay, let me watch this one more time now because you got me thinking.
Because it's really close to his stick exiting the zone. I'm not saying that he doesn't deserve credit for the look because, you know, it's all about, for Draisaitl here, the shoulder check that he does as he's going toward the net. That's what sets the whole play up. But I'm just wondering, since it was just out of reach for the guy at the near blue line on the zone exit, if that was the true intention of the target. I'd love to ask him.
Yeah, that is a good point. Maybe a little bit lucky that his own teammate didn't get in the way of that eventual highlight reel goal. One other result from last night that really stood out for me as we wrap up the nightcap here, it's the Rangers' offensive outburst, Frank. They get goals from 6 different players as they score 6 unanswered in a 6-1 win over the Philadelphia Flyers last night. And all of a sudden, after all the drama of, call it, the first 50 games of the season for the New York Rangers, They are back in a playoff spot by points percentage. And when you look since January 1st, they've played 12 games. They've got points in 11 of them with a record of 8-1-3. And something that's really standing out, I know Johnny Lazarus will keep talking about Igor Shesterkin and the numbers he's putting together. But how about the scoring depth that's starting to emerge here for the New York Rangers? In those 12 games, 18 different players have found the back of the net for the New York Rangers. It has been quite the run for them. And listen, I know I'm preaching to the choir because you were someone who always pushed back against the idea of put a fork in them. They're done, sell off, start getting rid of some players here. And listen, I know they made the move with Jacob Trouba. They moved out a guy like Capo Caco. But I mean, Frank, is it maybe fair to say that Chris Drury is now going to be in ad mode with the way this team's playing?
Well, I think in an odd way, they were already in ad mode, so to speak, anyway. You don't move out Jacob Trouba's massive contract in full without having some sort of thought process in terms of how you're going to fill in that money if you're the New York Rangers. You're not leaving it there as an empty space on the bingo card to save money on your budget. The Rangers were almost spending this much 20 years ago before the salary cap existed. This is a drop in the bucket for the team in the NHL that arguably brings in the most revenue year in and year out, especially when you compare currencies. So look, the New York Rangers aren't going to sit idle. They've obviously been active in the JT Miller conversation, and we'll touch on that in a minute when we get to our trade targets board. But I'm glad that you mentioned the depth scoring, because I think when you look at their bottom six, and obviously a bit of an outlier to have Chris Kreider there right now playing with Filipino and Arthur Kaliev, but look at some of the size that they've got on that fourth line. Adam Edstrom, he gets a goal last night. Matt Rempe, way more impactful game. So you look at those things and you go, this has the makings to be something interesting if they could just get their heads screwed on straight. And I think they've been a lot better. It's truly powerful.
Yeah. Let's stick in the Eastern Conference. Let's stick in the Metropolitan Division here. Yesterday, we touched briefly on the Jacob Markstrom injury in New Jersey, and it was Sheldon Keefe after the game saying he's going to miss some time, and now we know how much time for Markstrom. It's 4 to 6 weeks with a knee sprain for the Devils starter, and the one angle of this is for the New Jersey Devils. Luckily for them, they have one of the best duos in the league. This is why you go have a guy like Jake Allen sitting as your backup, because I don't think anyone in New Jersey is wincing or scared that Jake Allen's going to have to handle an increased workload here for a little bit. And one thing that'll certainly help them is they have 7 more games until the Four Nations break. None of them are back-to-backs. Like, I think it's reasonable that Sheldon Keefe and the Devils can sit here and just point to Jake Allen and go, get ready for the next 7. We're playing you like a true start, or like a true number 1 starting goalie here. Now, the other side of this, Frank, is Team Sweden at the Four Nations face-off. We had our conversation with Brent Wallace earlier in the week where it was like, hey, what do you do if you're the Senators with Linus Ullmark? Are you going to Sweden saying, hey, he can be your third goalie, but we don't know if we want him actually playing hockey. We want him to rest because there's a big playoff push coming up after that Four Nations face-off for the Ottawa Senators, and Linus Ullmark is a very, very key part of that, obviously. But now with no Markstrom, they do still have Philip Gustafsson from the Minnesota Wild, who, like Markstrom, is putting together the type of season that'll see him land on some Vezina Trophy ballots, Frank. But when you look at the other goalies that are kind of options now for Sweden at the Four Nations, things kind of fall off in a hurry. This isn't like a Team USA where they got 5 or 6 guys, and it's like, yeah, if we need one of them to come sit on the bench, they can do the job, even if we got to play them. You look, and I mean, Sam Ersson, Arvid Soderblom, like the options are there. There's only 7.
It's been decided already. Per Bierman reported yesterday that Sam Ersson is going to be the guy that replaces Jacob Markstrom on the roster. But that highlights your point, which is the depth isn't there for Sweden. And Sam Ersson has struggled at times this year mightily. So who are they going to go with? You mentioned, is it go further down the list and go to Hogberg? Like, no, they're going to go with Sam Ersson. That has been talked about in the Swedish management group and confirmed and reported by Per. But it really, if anything, it places significant pressure on both Gustafsson to be the guy that carries the ball. It's not an incredibly long tournament. I mean, you're talking about 4 games here. And that's, can Philip Gustafsson carry the ball for 4 games? He can, but should he go down with injury, then I think you're putting the Ottawa Senators and Linus Ullmark in a really uncomfortable spot, which is he may not be seeing action prior to Four Nations face-off. He may get in a game or two, but I think at the very least you want your franchise goalie, the guy that you're riding for a playoff spot, to be as healthy as possible for when the season matters most. And that's tough. So the amazing part about this is we are more than 7 weeks on from the day that Four Nations face-off rosters were named, December 4th, and this is the first player that we've seen come up that needed to be replaced. It's kind of been a remarkable run of health for these Four Nations and their roster health, but we figured at some point before the tournament that this would pop up, and unfortunately for the Devils and Markstrom, he goes down a few weeks before the tournament, 4 to 6 week injury with that sprained MCL. And it also places pressure now on Allen moving forward. And by the way, one thing to watch out for the Montreal Canadiens is because of that Allen trade last year at the deadline, if he ends up playing, I think 25 more games this year, that pick will change from a third to a second round pick. So not the biggest deal in the world, but if he's chewing off 7 between now and Four Nations face-off, if he plays all of them, that leaves 18 over the last 30, which doesn't sound like a ton, but it kind of might be in the cards if Markstrom's health isn't in order. And he has kind of been known to be one of those guys that might take an extra week or two on top of what's been listed on the injury report.
Interesting nugget there on that Allen deal as well. Let's stick with, we mentioned the Ottawa Senators there briefly, Frank. Let's stick with them as we move to the concernometer and a couple of struggling offenses in the NHL. We had Brent Wallace on, like I said, earlier in the week. And at that point, it was like, hey, the Senators are not scoring. They'd been shut out a couple of times in their last 10 games. And then last night, they got shut out again by the Boston Bruins. Back-to-back games without a goal for Ottawa. Shut out 6 times now in their last 11. 1-10. What's the concern level here with the Senators offense?
With the Senators offense, it's like an 8. With the Senators as a whole, it's like a 6. I think this is a good team, not a great team, a team that has flaws, but one that with Ullmark back looks like a totally different group. And I think, to be honest, the fact that we are entering February and this team is squarely in the mix for a group of core players that have only been used to their season being over by November to withstand this Ullmark injury and that lengthy road trip that was hellacious surrounding World Juniors and still be in the mix, I think deserves some credit for the fight that they have. I think that they've had way better attention to detail this year under Travis Green, and the fact that they haven't scored the way they'd like to, and their numbers on the defensive side of the puck are really quite impressive, I think speaks to the job that Green and his staff have done in terms of changing the attitude and approach from this group. That said, they could definitely use more of a boost, especially in their middle 6. Like, I think they've got the top end players to produce, but they need that second and third wave that I think has been missing in Ottawa. I see too much one and done when I watch their team. They get a look, they get an opportunity, and not a ton of sustained offensive zone time, which really stands out.
Let me ask you about a Western team that's also struggling in the goal department. The Minnesota Wild got shut out last night by the Utah Hockey Club. And listen, they were under 4 goals in 7 straight hockey games, but I think a lot of people went, just wait till Kirill Kaprizov's back. He returns to the lineup, and like I said, they end up getting shut out. For me to be above a 5 here, I think I probably need to see 2 or 3 games with Kaprizov back where they still struggle to score. But I do think that this last stretch, Frank, puts a little bit more emphasis on GM Bill Guerin needing to go get some scoring at the deadline. Where's your concern with the Wild and their offense?
Not very high. I think it is a concern, but it's not new, I guess, so to speak. It's not like, this has been a trend that I think has been developing more and more. What's the biggest thing that I said about the Wild going back to October and November? They were producing at a rate that was unsustainable for them. It was bound to regress. It has. And then they got hit in the face with a mallet with Kaprizov going down. He's missed a month as a Hart Trophy candidate, and he gets to resume that chase, but that's a long time to be without your star player who just is the guy driving your bus on a nightly basis. So the fact that they're still, and not far off of the Winnipeg Jets, still holding ground over the Dallas Stars and Colorado Avalanche, I think speaks to the start that they had, and also now the damage that they could do when they get their engine back.
Yeah, it doesn't work this way, but in a twisted way, it almost feels like Kaprizov being out strengthened his Hart Trophy case because it's like, man, they can't score without him in the lineup. They needed him back. Let's move along.
That's happened with Kaprizov and Quinn Hughes in Vancouver. I think you watch those two guys, and if you're, Leon Draisaitl's case is incredibly strong, but if you're talking about truly most valuable to his team, those guys have really strong cases to make.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Let's move along. Our deadline countdown article yesterday that we didn't have a chance to get to was about the potential true sellers in the Eastern Conference. Which teams out east are really looking to offload at the deadline? And listen, I think to an extent, we know the Islanders are going to be in that mix. We know the Sabres are going to be in that mix, although how they go about it could be a little bit more unique than a traditional seller. But where do you come out on some of the teams that are in the mushy middle? Detroit with someone like Patrick Kane. Is Steve Yzerman going to get to a point where he'll, to an extent, punt on this season and move out a guy like Kane? What about the heartwarming stories? Montreal's having a great year. Columbus is obviously a big one, but they still have a couple of players on your trade targets board. Where do you come out on those teams sort of in the mushy middle, call it, Frank, or teams that are surprisingly pushing for a playoff spot? Do you think any of them will slip into the seller mode?
I think it's possible with the right offers, but the way I look at a lot of those teams outside of the Islanders, who I think are the only true seller in the traditional sense, is there's such pressure facing these teams to get in. Detroit, it's not just to have playoff hockey back again. It's also to give these guys an experience and a taste of what the postseason is like, something to strive for over the summer. Ottawa desperately needs that. And the Montreal Canadiens, it'd be nice to have, not a need to have. And same thing with the Columbus Blue Jackets. But the thing is, last year's turtle race, I think, taught us that it came down to the final day for three different teams. If you can hang in just long enough, you might give yourself an opportunity to surprise and be that team that breaks through in the final 3 days of the season or something like that. So unless, and this is how I would characterize it for both Columbus and Montreal specifically, maybe a little bit unexpected to be in this mix right now. Don't take yourself out of it unless you're getting something in return that is truly significant. Trading David Savard for a 4th round pick, it doesn't help you. They've got plenty of picks ahead of that, and adding one more to the pile. And if you're pressing a younger player into a spot that he's not ready for, doesn't help you either get to the playoffs or with that player's development. So Ivan Provorov is a great example in Columbus. He wants to stay. Your team's fought all year long. How do you get to a spot where you're 7 weeks away from the postseason, you're right on the cut line, and then you tell your team, hey, I know you've worked hard all season, but man, this 1st round pick that we're getting in return that might not see the ice for 4 years, we really need this. It sends the wrong message at times. So I think there's a real delicate line to walk. And I think the only team that's really firmly in that category, the traditional, we are going to get and need future assets and we are going to unload this roster, even though they haven't said it publicly, it has to be the New York Islanders.
And then another player slip into the top 10 of your trade targets board, which is a nice transition to our big topic for the day. It's brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, where you can get a custom ring built and delivered in less than 4 weeks with the Charm Masterpiece program. It all comes with an unbeatable pricing policy. You can find out more information online by visiting them at charmdiamondcenters.com. An all-new trade targets board up now at dailyfaceoff.com, and there's an all-new number 1 on your board, Frank. It is, of course, JT Miller. What's the latest with Miller, the Canucks, and the potential suitors?
Well, I kind of liken it to the scene in my favorite movie. It's my favorite drunk movie, by the way. If I'm had a few drinks and I'm not passing out, Wolf of Wall Street is my go-to. And when he's like, I'm not leaving. Well, that's not what JT Miller's saying, but he ain't leaving the number 1 spot on my trade targets board until he gets traded. He's there now. The Canucks are working on it. He's ready to move. He's signaled to them that he's ready to go. Their play on the ice signals completely that change is necessary. And look, it's been a difficult spot for them to be in. Everyone in the league recognizes the friction that's there. They recognize his age and the money and term left on his deal. and they see the drop off in his play and they wonder, is this the right fit for us at this particular moment? And there's been plenty of teams outside of the New York Rangers that have stepped up. There was some reporting yesterday that it's Rangers or bust. I don't think that's the case. I think the Carolina Hurricanes have been working incredibly hard. I think they've presented a few different potential opportunities for Vancouver, whatever fits their fancy. Obviously, haven't gotten it over the finish line, but I believe outside of New York that no one has done more work on the Miller file than the Carolina Hurricanes.
Interesting. And like you said, not going anywhere. He will stay there till he's moved. And again, that's the topic of our poll question. Will he still be a Canuck 7 days from now on February 1st? Let's talk about another name in your top.
My answer to that is no, by the way.
You think it's in the next week here?
Yeah, I just think they have to pull the Band-Aid off. I mean, they could get through the end of the season and they could, basically say to their locker room, hey, we're not trading him and you guys need to figure it out. But if that were going to be the case, they would have already done it. And I don't think you can let a season where, again, as poorly and inconsistently as they've played, they're 10 good days away from kind of really firmly being in that 7-8 spot in the West, or at least the 8th spot, and having a real chance to lock it down. Don't waste an MVP caliber season from Quinn Hughes because you couldn't figure out a deal. It's going to be painful. The return is not going to be great. They've already come to grips with it. Just do it.
I want to ask you about a couple other names in your top 10, one in your top 5. Penguins defenseman Marcus Pettersson is the number 1 D-man on your board. What kind of sense do you get on them? How do you sense the market will be for him? Will it be strong? Is Pittsburgh maybe going to get a better return than they think because he is the number 1 D-man on the board?
No, it's not going to be a huge return, but he's far and away their most movable asset. And I'd say they're another team that, outside of the Islanders, is probably the next closest team to continue our conversation that's in the closest to seller position possible. Outside of Pettersson, if you're talking traditional deadline moves, Marcus Pettersson is the one guy as a pending UFA. I'm going to maybe lump Drew O'Connor in there as a 4th liner, but who are the guys that really bring you value if you're Kyle Dubas that you can easily move on from without blinking? So it just seems like a wash, rinse, repeat type scenario. Move them out, get some assets back. If you want to take those assets later and package them for something else that you think could help you in a quick little retool, a 1 or 2 year window to maybe try and get back in a playoff spot with Sidney Crosby, not all that different than what the Washington Capitals have tried to accomplish with Alex Ovechkin. That's the route to go, is use someone like Pettersson to move on.
Next team I wanted to ask you about is the Buffalo Sabres. Cousins and Byram have been in your top 10 for a while now, but another name joins them on your board, and it's another young name in Jack Quinn. So a third young Sabre is in your top 15, Frank. What is Kevyn Adams going to do here? Because you just said a minute ago you don't have them lumped in with the New York Islanders as a true traditional seller. So what is this Sabres front office going to try to accomplish in the next 6 weeks?
Well, I'd say that your guess is as good as mine, because they were in a spot earlier this season where they were floundering. And I think Kevyn Adams resisted the urge with the number of teams calling to pull the trigger and potentially to save them from themselves with the damage that you can do when you make a trade as your team is struggling as mightily as they were. They've rebounded. They're still not obviously squarely back in the mix, but they have played better of late. And Jack Quinn is a guy that, going back to November or late October, teams were calling on, because I thought quite legitimately, and if you go back to the beginning of the season with, my 10 breakout stars that I have, I thought Quinn could have been one of those guys this year. He missed such a significant chunk of time that I figured, hey, this is someone that was forgotten. He, had such a good rookie year and burst onto the scene that I was like, this guy has something. And it's not all that different than in that year that a bunch of Sabres had career years that you were thinking this team is definitely on the rise. And then they took 2 steps backwards. And in Quinn's case, obviously the time missed didn't help. So he has seen time as a healthy scratch. I think the Sabres aren't really quite sure what to make of where his development path is going from here. But I know that teams have been interested in following.
All new trade targets board out now at dailyfaceoff.com. Pat threw it in our chat as well, so people can go get a look at the full list of 30 names that Frank has on his board. 6 weeks until the deadline. It should be good. That's a wrap on another edition of Icebreakers, brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers. Get to our poll question results for Dominion Lending Centers. Is your mortgage up for renewal? Lock in the best rates and products with Dominion Lending Centers by visiting them online at dominionlending.ca. Frank says yes, or sorry, Frank says no. JT Miller will not be a Canuck by February 1st, and the Twitter agrees with you. 62% voting no. Frank is certainly heating up on the JT Miller front. Let me ask you about another team, though, that we got here in the YouTube chat. The Boston Bruins have 2 names in your top 20, Trent Frederick and Justin Brazeau. Is there any chance you think the Bruins sell off more than just their UFAs?
I think they're another one of those wild card teams. And I don't mean like scrapping for a wild card spot. I mean, take Cam Neely at exactly what his words were, which are, we may need to consider some things here and kind of retool this, because this team has missed the mark. I think they made some really poor decisions on the free agent market with Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov and the contracts that they have. And I think they've got a big question in front of them with Brad Marchand and what that extension looks like. People are asking me, why isn't Marchand on your trade targets board? They're just not there yet. I don't think the Bruins are there yet. They've gone back and forth on an extension. I think they want him to be there, and I know he wants to be there. So unless there's some definitive declaration one way or the other, you're not going to see Marchand on my board. But I mentioned the Bruins in connection with JT Miller last night. I know they're a team that's closely monitoring this situation. We know the hole that they have on their roster at the center position, and to get a high-end, high-impact guy, he also seems to kind of fit the nature of that organization. He's an intense player. Cam Neely is an intense executive. Like, I could see that being a guy that they really like, and I know they're keeping an eye on it. I just don't know how active they've been in talks with the Canucks. I think they're kind of waiting to see how this all shakes out.
Fair enough. Another potential wild card at the NHL trade deadline. Let's go to our daily bets for Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary for Bet365. Had a great week. Nailed the Oilers money line with Draisaitl 2+ points yesterday. Nailed a handful of plus money bets already this week. So why not chase another one? Also hit the Caps on the puck line yesterday at a very juicy +185. How about the Jets on the puck line, taking on the Utah Hockey Club? Utah was in action last night on the road this season. Utah is actually above 500, but the Jets have also been a very good home team this year at 18-8 straight up. And how about this? Connor Hellebuyck has been lights out no matter what this season, but on home ice, he has a .932 save percentage and a 1.81 goals against average. Once Hellebuyck is a confirmed starter, I will lock in this bet, Jets on the puck line. And also, it's Friday, so let's have some fun with a little goal scorer parlay. Nick Ehlers +210, Nick Paul +280. Both these guys get heavy power play minutes. Both of them have been kind of sputtering and a bit inconsistent over their last 10, but I like the price tags, and I like both of these matchups for Tampa Bay and Winnipeg. So give me a juicy goal scorer parlay. And Frank, 3rd week in a row, are we running back the Bills-Eagles parlay? What do you think?
I'm in. I'd be more nervous for you than me, but what do you think?
Eventually, you got to beat them, right? Like, it's the old, like, if you play a matchup 100 times, no team's going to win 100 times. So the Bills have lost whatever it is now 4 times to the Chiefs in the playoffs. Frank, I'm being a homer. I'm being biased. It's blind fandom, but like, the Bills are the definition of doing this matchup.
I mean, yes, but they're going up against one of the all-time best in Patrick Mahomes. I mean, look, I get it. The Caps eventually beat the Penguins, but forever, I was at a ton of those playoff series where they just didn't matter what happened. They just didn't have the juice. So you're right. I just doesn't also mean that it's this year.
Fair. All right, let's wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time. Frank, you got one today. What do you want to throw my way?
So I don't mean to cast any shade or any dispersions on anyone, or this is not about any one reporter or any reporting in general, but we're 6 weeks out from the NHL trade deadline. That means everyone's looking for a kernel, a little something, a little story, a little nugget, some trade scoop. Here's what not to do is to look into the seating chart in the press box and check out who's scouting there, or to see 2 NHL GMs talking at the rink and assume that that means that there's something going on. So what am I talking about here? Well, Kyle Davidson, the Blackhawks GM, was spotted at the last 2 Colorado Avalanche games. He was also conversing with Chris McFarland, their general manager. The Blackhawks weren't playing in Denver. So why is he there? Oh, well, they must be trading Seth Jones. And that's not how it works. In truth, Kyle Davidson and his assistant GM, Norm McIver, they were in Denver to watch their prospect, Aiden Thompson, who plays at the University of Denver. They happened to have a gap in their Blackhawks schedule and had time to get to an NHL game to see a couple other teams in their conference. Nothing more to see to it than that. So I guess the point of my story here is, look, always keep your eyes open. Always report what you see. But taking it a bridge too far and saying the Avalanche are interested in Seth Jones, it's just not the case. So I guess, just do the reporting is what I would say.
Yeah, if I had $1 for every time something went crazy on Twitter because this team has 4 scouts watching this team and nothing came of it, I would have a lot of loonies is the point. It seems every deadline season there's 30 of those stories and they never really amount to all that much because teams are always scouting other teams and always looking around.
There was one a couple, maybe like 10 days ago. They were like, hey, this team has 4 scouts at the Florida Panthers game. Yeah, that's because they were doing their pro scouting meetings in Florida that week and they all just happened to drop into the game after their meetings were over. It's great to put out there what you're seeing, just provide proper context or ask the question before then taking the next step to say they're interested in Seth Jones. It's not even feasible from Colorado's perspective.
That's crazy. All right, that is a wrap on today's edition of the show. Frank, absolute dog, absolute warrior, getting through this one for us and giving us a new trade targets board. Wanted to give some love to our on-site producers here, RJ Graham and Patrick Puff, who put together a fantastic set on a very tight time crunch as well. So they were awesome. The Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge, always great hosts for us for our pond hockey tournament. Frank, you enjoy your hockey tournament this weekend as well. And everybody in the YouTube chat, enjoy the hockey. We'll chat with you again on Monday. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Saravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking. You're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.